morning, WellHouse Church. Pastor Cullen, excited to wish you a happy Easter. Yes, today is Easter. And if you don't know, Easter is the day that those who identify as Christians and even some that don't get together to celebrate the way in which the Christian story has reached its climax with Jesus overcoming and conquering death. Resurrection Sunday is the day that Jesus conquers death and arises from the tomb. And, if I can be honest, that's great. That's a story that's been told. There are lots of other stories just like that throughout the ancient world. If you spend much time around atheists or agnostics, they like to promote this truth that there are stories just like the story of Jesus in the ancient world. They're not called Jesus. And so what I wanted to do today is I wanted to ask the question, what is the truth of the resurrection? What are we supposed to glean from this story of the resurrection? I don't know if you got a chance to watch our Good Friday contemplative that I affectionately titled A Not So Good Friday. But in it, I did a creative retelling of the experience of Jesus' crucifixion through a contemplative kind of exercise. And at the end, I explained the reason that I wanted to do that was because we don't get to experience the fullness of Easter Sunday, the celebration of Easter Sunday, because we didn't go through the trauma of Crucifixion Friday and the doubt, the despair, the grief, the mourning over the death of our Savior on Saturday before we experienced Resurrection Sunday. What most of us did is eat some really good food, maybe have some kind of Thanksgiving prayer for the cross, something along those lines. This is a very exciting event for us. But that's not the way the ancients would have viewed it. And it's not even the way that we really even should experience it. Because we're robbing ourselves of the beauty, the fullness of the story. And so I wanted to take us down this journey to get to Resurrection Sunday, to get to today and ask the question, what is the truth of the resurrection? What is the truth of Jesus conquering death? What is that truth for you? What is that truth for me? So today I'm not going to be preaching the Jesus arising from the tomb stories in the Gospels. I'm going to continue through the book of Acts, but we get to see Jesus meet a character in the book of Acts. It feels very much more a truth that we can glean from the resurrection. So this is how chapter 9 of Acts begins. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Saul is the same character that we met in chapter 8, who oversaw the persecution of Stephen and was ravaging the homes of the Christians. This is that character. He is still going around, breathing out threats, arresting people. The text here is hard to understand if he's just doing hollow threats and murder, or if there's threats of murder. My suspicion is that you can look at Philippians and the way in which Paul talks about himself from this time, which you can join me on a closer look tomorrow to do, I think Paul's also committing murder, just like he did with Stephen. But he asks them if he can have letters to go to Damascus in order to terrorize the people of the way, the Christians that are there, and bring them back, arrest them and bring them back to Jerusalem. This is that guy, ravaging the church. If you don't remember, I wrote a creative retelling of Saul the Ravager on my blog. And that's what I affectionately called him, was Saul the Ravager, as someone who's persecuting the church, on mission to destroy the message, the people who have garnered a following because of the truth, the resurrection of Jesus. This guy's trying to destroy them. This is what the text says next. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." So this story, this character who's been persecuting and ravaging the church, asks for permission from the religious power, the religious authority, to go to Damascus to continue terrorizing this church and arrest them and bring them back to Jerusalem. And on the way to Damascus, on the road to Damascus, this bright light happens, a flash, and a voice begins to speak. Now, when Paul talks about this, when Saul/Paul, Paul's his Greek name, when Paul talks about this experience later, he seems to think that he met the person Jesus on the road to Damascus. And so this light flashes, something divine happens, and he hears a voice and says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" First of all, the truth of the resurrection, I believe, is that when Jesus conquers death and offers life, that life in Jesus, human flourishing, life and life abundant, as the Gospel of John would say, is experienced in everyone. Every human being that is pursuing divine likeness gets to experience the fullness of life and human flourishing. And that is why Jesus can come and say, "Why do you persecute me?" Saul did not ever once persecute Jesus of Nazareth. That never once happened. But Jesus, in his encounter with Paul, says, "Why do you persecute me?" Because the truth of the resurrection is that those who are breathing life are experiencing truth of the conquering of death. The truth of the resurrection is that the human being, the one experiencing life, is worth something. That you are worthy of love and flourishing and life, and for someone, divinity themselves, to overcome death and all the things associated with death. Which I think the second part of this verse helps us understand. Verse 5, he asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." WellHouse Church, it is my belief that the truth of the resurrection is that life happens in the non-pursuit of power. Only people of power have the power to persecute. This entire book, this entire work in the book of Acts has been a conversation of power. Jesus' teachings are a conversation of power. Jesus' actions are a conversation of power. One of the greatest things that I think Jesus has ever said was, the last will be first and the first will be last. The truth of Good Friday is the King of all of creation experienced exaltation and coronation of his throne. And it happened in humiliation. A crown of thorns, a bloody sash, an exaltation on the cross. Instead of life and abundance, it was trauma, torture, and death. The truth of the resurrection for me is that divine power, this care and ability to give of ourselves for the human flourishing and life of those around us, that is the truth of the resurrection in the way that I read the story and I have experienced it. But WellHouse Church, as always, what I want to ask you is, what do you think the truth of the resurrection